Hello, in this unit we're going to start learning about OR. We'll learn one inference rule for OR in this unit, and we'll learn another in the next. So, OR. This is our OR symbol. So, box v circle means box or circle. We call this a disjunction, so we have conjunctions, those are ands, disjunctions, ORs. And we call this symbol the OR disjunction, or V. And then the pieces, the box and the circle, when they're inside of the disjunction symbol, are called disjuncts. So just like conjunction, except with the prefix dis instead of con. So there it is. There's some more sort of informal notation, parentheses dropping issues that arise with OR. So, and actually some of these issues arise with AND as well. You can group multiple ANDs, and you can also group multiple ORs. So you could write this box and or square and circle and triangle, then you can abbreviate that just by dropping all of the parentheses. And you can do the same thing with a string of ORs. So when it is like this, when you have multiple ands or multiple ors and the parentheses are missing, when you need to put them back on, and how do you put them back on? You start with the leftmost and or. So this string without the parentheses, it abbreviates parenthesis, square or circle, parenthesis, or triangle. It doesn't abbreviate parenthesis, square, or parenthesis, circle, or triangle, parenthesis. And those two sentences with the parentheses restored, they're equivalent in their logical sense that whenever one is true, so is the other. Whenever one is false, so is the other. So they're equivalent in the same way that not, square, and square are equivalent to each other. But they are different sentences, and the inference rules will handle them slightly differently. So you just want to know when you see a string of them that the parentheses are grouping around the leftmost symbol. You cannot group a mixture of ands and ors, and you can't, if you have a mixture of ands and ors, you can't take the parentheses away. So for example, if we look at this string, we have P and Q or R. So how would we say that? P and Q or R, but that's ambiguous. It could mean P and either Q or R, or it could mean either P and Q or R. So the first one, number one, if that's true, then P is true, because it's a conjunction, and both conjunctions have to be true, and one of the conjunctions is P. The second one does not require that P be true. It's a disjunction, and if the first disjunct is true, if P and Q is true, then P is true. But if the right disjunct is true, the second disjunct, if R is true, then the whole thing is true, and maybe P and Q is true, or maybe it's not. So the first one requires that P be true, the second one does not require that P be true, and so they say different things, and so the original P and Q or R, that's ambiguous. And so in this case, we do not allow parentheses to be dropped. They can only be dropped when you have a string of the same symbols, all ands or all ors. We have the same behavior with conditionals and disjunctions that we have with conditionals and conjunctions. So for example, if you'll recall, if we have these parenthesis P and Q arrow R parenthesis, we can drop the external parentheses because they're not needed for anything at this point. And then we say when you have a conjunction in the antecedent or consequent of a conditional, you can drop the parentheses around the conjunction. Well, the same thing is true with OR, and the biconditional behaves just the same as the conditional. So if we have parenthesis P, biconditional, parenthesis Q or R, parenthesis, then we can drop the first external pair of parentheses because they're not doing anything, and then we get to drop the pair around the OR, just the same as we got to drop the pair around the AND in the previous example. So the parenthesis dropping is just the same. So, but when the conditional or biconditional is inside of the disjunction or conjunction, when you have a conjunction or a disjunction and one of the conjuncts or disjuncts is a conditional, then you can't drop the parentheses around the conditional. So this P, if and only if Q or R, there you cannot drop the parentheses. And again, that's just the way we are already used to working with and the conditional. So we're just extending this so that the biconditional works the way the conditional does, and the disjunction works the way the conjunction does in this convention we already have. So that's Nothing shocking. Okay, then one point about what we actually mean by or. So, in some sense, or has different. There, in one way or another, something. There are different ways in which or is used. So, if you're in a restaurant, they say super salad comes with the meal. You don't get both. It's soup or salad, but not both. You can pick one, and you can't have the other. There's an inclusive or, which I might ask, will you contribute food or money? And then a person says, oh, actually, I'll contribute both. I say, no problem. So what's the difference? Well, in the exclusive sense, they cannot, if the or is true, then one of the disjuncts is false, and one of them is true. In the inclusive sense, if the whole disjunction is true, then one could be true, one could be false. The other could be true, or the first can be true and the second false. The second can be true and the first false, or both of them can be true. So the inclusive says, yeah, I include all the options. And the exclusive says, no, they can't both be true. One excludes the other. So it could be that actually every time we use or, fundamentally it's inclusive. The thing that you say is true if both disjuncts are true, but there's just a suggestion of exclusion. This is in the same way that if I say he is cheerful but he's happy, it could be that that is true if the person I'm talking about is cheerful and happy, and there's a suggestion of a contrast, but the suggestion is not part of the truth conditions of the sentence. And so here, similarly, in the case of but, there's a suggestion of a contrast, but it's not part of whether or not the sentence is actually true or false. So here, the suggestion of the exclusion between soup and salad might not be part of whether or not the sentence is true, but is an exclusion that is merely suggested by the use of the sentence. Or it could be that actually some ors really are exclusive, and that in that case, the disjunction is false if both disjuncts are true. So there are these two senses. How should we understand this? Well, there's some issue. It's not clear. We are going to just treat our or in our logical language as inclusive, and we will treat all English ors as inclusive as well. And we'll see why it's inclusive actually when we look at the inference rules. So how do we symbolize? So all of our, whenever we see an or, we're going to think that's inclusive and symbolize it with the V symbol. If for some reason you wanted to symbolize an exclusive or, how would you do that? Well, so exclusive or is true like this. It's false if both disjuncts are false, and it's false if both disjuncts are true. It's true if one disjunct is true and the other is false. So in other words, it's true if and only if the disjuncts have different truth values. If they're both false, they have the same truth value. If they're both true or they're both false, so if they have the same truth value, then the disjunction is false. If one is true and the other is false, and so they have different truth values, then the disjunction is true. So the disjunction in the exclusive sense, it's true if and only if the disjuncts have different truth values. How could you symbolize that? Well, we know the biconditional is true if the two components have the same truth values, so we just negate the biconditional. This negation of the biconditional, that's true if and only if the two components have different truth values. So if you wanted to symbolize an exclusive or, you would use the negation of a biconditional. I just wanted to explain that to you. Whenever you see an or in a symbolization problem, treat it as an inclusive or, symbolize it with the V symbol, the disjunction symbol that we've just learned about in this video. The symbolization with or is pretty straightforward. It's just, in terms of the grammar, it works just like and so you'll see that as you get into some of the symbolization problems. I'm going to, in the next video, do some, or introduce one of the inference rules that we have with our or, and then in the next unit, we'll learn the other inference rule for or.